Good morning, how are you? My name is Sharon. I'm the Leadership Academy Manager for The Wheel, and thank you everyone for joining us this morning at our breakfast club here in Salesforce, which I think we can all admit is a little bit gorge. And the mugs and the coffee and the little square cones. So thank you very much, Salesforce, Keane and his team, for having us. So the Breakfast Clubs are the leadership event series brought to you by Leadership Academy, which is run by The Wheel, which is Ireland's national association for the community, voluntary, charity and social enterprise sector in Ireland. And the Academy is a place for leaders in our sector at any stage of their journey to take the next steps on their leadership journey. And the Breakfast Clubs are designed to help you take some time as a leader to have a think about bigger issues and to connect with other people in the sector. So thank you for taking the time to join us this morning. So this morning we're going to talk about change. So every day we engage in very different systems. So we engage in education systems, welfare systems, health. But what happens when you or we in the sector see something in a system that you want to change? And a lot of us are actually engaged in trying to make changes in systems. So today we're going to talk about different ways of making change. So we're joined today by two speakers who are very involved in changing systems. Ailbhe Smyth, I'm sure many of you know, is a campaigner and former academic with a long-standing strategic, political and organisational experience. She was a co-director of Together for Yes referendum campaign, co-founder and convener of the Coalition to Repeal the Eighth Amendment, strategic advisor for Marriage Equality Referendum 2015, and has a wide involvement in NGO and the community sector. She is currently chair of Women's Aid and sits on a number of Irish non-profits. She was a UCD senior academic for 40 years and the founding head of women's study at UCD with extensive lecturing experience. Hi, Colette. Hi, Ailbhe. Colette, sorry. And then Colette Bennett is the Director of Advocacy and Research for The Wheel. No, we have a bio. She joined The Wheel in 2023 after 14 years working at a senior level in justice, advocacy and organisational development. She's a Master's in Social Justice and Public Policy and is a qualified solicitor with a professional cert from the Law Soc of Ireland. She is a member of the Royal Irish Academy Social Sciences Committee and she's provided guest lectures for several universities. So two very different backgrounds, two very different ways of doing things, but both heavily involved in making change. So, Ailbhe, I'm going to start with you, possibly one of the most well-known activists in Irish society. Can you tell me a bit about your work now and why you do what you do?
I really find that very difficult. When I arrived this morning, first of all, I was asked for a QR code, and I think like everybody else, I didn't have a QR code, so I started, oh my God, I clearly haven't got the right credentials for this wonderful, brilliant building. And then they said, yes, and your name, etc., and your company. I said, I don't have a company. So I felt kind of immediately, what am I? So I think of myself as a kind of lone trader, really, at the most, solo trader in advocacy, campaigning for equality and for human rights. And that's basically what I do. But it's true, I suppose, that from really the late 1970s onwards, that's what I've been doing anyway in my life, is really, I suppose, working at whatever I'm doing with a very strong consciousness of how we don't have equality, how we don't have justice, how we don't, the vast majority of people really either don't know their rights or don't have any access to them, or nobody has ever thought that they maybe should have access or that they should have rights. And that was very much what I was doing all the while I was in UCD as an academic. At the moment, I don't really know how to describe it. I suppose I do a lot of working with groups and organizations, a lot of speaking with groups, and I have a feeling that, somebody asked me recently, and I said, well, sometimes I open things, sometimes I close things, and sometimes I speak in the middle. So that's kind of about what I do. But there is very much an aim, and I try to stay within, broadly speaking, my own kind of fields of equality, human rights, and social justice. and I'm working with Women's Aid as chair. I also chair an addiction service in Ballyfermot Star. I work with Age Action because, you know, most of what I do has come from, in some way or another, my own experience or my own observation. So as an older person now, you know, I am scandalized, shocked, annoyed and furious about the ways our attitudes towards older people, not just for myself, but kind of more broadly. And I'm very happy to speak up about that. So a lot of it comes from wherever I am at in my own life at a given moment in time.
Thank you so much. And Colette, you joined the Wheel last year as our Director of Advocacy and Research. You're an advocate for social change, and I think it's, so when Colette hears the word policy, I think she can hear it 3 rooms over. And so we all know Colette is policy, but when she's talking about it, you really see policy as the way to make change. And I thought that's really interesting. So can you tell us more about your role now and why you do it?
Yeah, so as you said, I joined the Wheel late last year as the Director of Advocacy and Research, and before that I was with a think tank, a social justice think tank. Before that I was with a debt advocacy organisation, and before that I was a corporate solicitor, and now I'm atoning for those sins. But I think I suppose why I do or what I do, it's really important, that whole piece around inclusion, and that it's so broad, and that I suppose we look to include people, because much like Ailbhe, my motivation for getting into this space is very personal, and people can, you know, people with a lot to say can be ignored. And I think certainly with my own experience, I felt that very deeply. To the extent that, I think I'm probably preempting one of your questions, but to the extent that I felt that needed to change. There was an experience when I was, you know, angry in 17, now I'm angry in 44, that, you know, I had the experience of going to a solicitor's office. My dad, we needed to get an affidavit signed, and he was so rude to us. My dad was so deferential, and I was so angry. And we walked home all the way, and I railed the entire way home. Like, why? Why did you allow that to happen? Why was that okay? And my dad was, well, you know, he's very intelligent. So, you know, he put in an awful lot of work. It's just reading. It's just reading. Law's just like, it's written in English. You can read, you can do it. So 10 years later, I qualified. It is a lot of reading. And it was from pure pig iron, but it wasn't enough. I thought once I got to be a solicitor and working in corporate law and being quite successful at it, I thought that would be enough, that would feel like enough, and it didn't. And then I volunteered with the Free Legal Advice Centres, and everything changed. I remember coming into the apartment the first day, and just thinking, oh, I'm in the wrong job, I'm in the wrong sector, everything's wrong. This was 10 years of absolute waste. But it kind of drove me on, and seeing that it wasn't just me that needed to change, or me that needed a change in career. There was actually a lot of people like me, a lot of people who felt that disadvantage in a system across a whole range of areas, and that's what needed to change. So yeah, I took an excellent career move in 2008 to change sectors from corporate law into this space. And, you know, I spent a year talking to people. Ivan Cooper was one of the first people I spoke to in my Giza job tour. And there was a lot of what would a corporate solicitor could do in this space. So it was the reverse of what I had experienced before. And then, you know, so it was about proving, and I suppose that's constantly my way. It's that proving that you can do it, proving that you're good enough to do it, that you can make a change, that you can be part of this, and continuing with that.
Thank you so much, and it is a brilliant story. And Ailbhe, you actually, just for a bit of context, it's interesting you were talking about your lived experience at a given time. What kick-started yours? What was the first injustice you were like, this can't be right?
Yeah, I suppose, I have to think back an awfully long way, but just listening to Colette there and thinking, first of all, that was a very brave change that you made. And I think that's also something really important, that it can be really hard to just grasp that nettle, so to speak, and say, this is not the right place for me to be. Either it's the wrong organization or company or whatever, or the wrong sector, the wrong job, and to just sort of think, yes, I will change, I will make a change, so that there is this sense that you have to very often change something in yourself. And I think that, and that's not easy to do, I think. I remember when I started in UCD, I'd been raised, this was back in the early 1970s. In fact, it was the very late 1960s. So we're going back a very long time to a very different Ireland. And I see, a couple of nods there, although actually, if you don't mind me saying so, you're younger than I am, so you don't really remember it. So, but I had been raised as a good, obedient girl, middle class, nice, well-behaved, polite. And I arrived into a big institution, UCD, where I was treated, frankly, like a piece of dust. Not exactly dirt, but, nobody would pay any attention. And I realized that this was happening to women right across the whole institution. And something just sort of got a bit stuck there in my craw, and I thought, this isn't right. And then lo and behold, the women's movement. I was so lucky. I was saved by the women's movement. It, exploded onto the scene in North America, in Britain, in Europe, and in Ireland at the beginning of the 1970s. And I thought, that's it. Because what they're saying is actually about what I'm feeling and what I'm experiencing. And that's not good enough. We can't be doing with that kind of thing. That's not acceptable. So, you sort of get up on your little high horse and you saddle up and everything and you roll out there and you discover that they're still batting you off, so that you need to do it with others. So that for me, from the get-go, understanding that working with others, in my case was working with other women, was absolutely crucial to bringing about change where I was. And that meant me not being a very nice, polite, quiet, well, I was never quiet really, but big, nice, polite little middle-class girl, okay, that it meant getting out there and shouting and roaring and saying this is not enough, and standing up at this meeting and getting out onto the streets and throwing things at people, quite frankly, to get them to listen. I don't want to be going on and on, but you get the picture, really,
I'm fascinated.
Sharon, okay?
I'm like, I will get my saddle and come with you.
But my point is very much that in a different context, that thing about how you change yourself and how you come, that you were talking about, Colette, how you come to that realization of how you need to change because there's something out there that you feel is not quite right. And somehow working with other people, getting the permission in a way, and just feeling brave enough to get out there and do it.
And you have, in your CV of change, you've seen phenomenal change, and like the whole country has seen phenomenal change, and you've been in the thick of all of it, like Repeal the 8th, Together for Yes, and like they're all cool and accepted now, but you wanted to do them before they were cool and acceptable. And you've got that wisdom of, what's the opposite of foresight? Hindsight. And I'm just wondering, like, why is social change, seeing everything you've seen, why is it so important?
Oh, I don't know. That's a very big question, really, Sharon. But I do think there is something about, I was, as I said, really very fortunate that I became part of the women's movement, that there was a way of thinking called feminism, which was a way of thinking and a way of doing, a way of being in the world, a way of challenging the world, which really gave me a lot of food for thought. So, because I do think that process of analysis, of thinking through, what is it about this situation? What are the systems? What are the structures? What are the difficulties? What are the challenges? And then working with others to have, I suppose, the imaginative leap of faith that you need to make to think about a world that could be different and what that might look like. For me personally, that's always been really important, is trying to, and this is not a terribly good moment actually in Ireland right now, is it? You know, this is, it's a very difficult time for an awful lot of people, but it's also a time when politically we might move one way or the other, or just stay stuck in the middle, or, you know, it is not a very easy time. And for me, it's always been really important, and I've been very lucky to have access to those spaces where you can think through the structures, where you can actually begin to imagine something that is different and to hold on to that imaginative things. I've always said you need to be a bit creative and imaginative. You've got to be able to imagine the world, you know, just as you were imagining a different scenario.
Yeah, I think to pick up on your comment, Colette, I totally agree. So you followed all the rules and then realised, oh, actually, it's not me, it's the system. Like, that's the bit that broke. So for you, why is changing the system and social change so important?
I suppose because without it, you miss so much potential. There are so many people who could do so much, and just because of the way structures are implemented, they don't get the opportunity to do it. So it's not that they lack the potential that somebody with more resources or more opportunities have. They may have the exact same. They just don't get to put it into practice. And it's seeing that. It's seeing what is commonly referred to as the poverty premium, but it applies to so many other social issues as well. It's that thing of, you know, if you can't afford to be on a direct debit with your utilities, you'll have a surcharge with a token meter. If you didn't get a mainstream mortgage, you'll get a subprime, but that'll come at a cost. You know, if you don't belong in certain spaces, you'll have to work really, really, really hard just to have the same level of engagement at a table as somebody else. So, you know, an example from my law days, I got in with my apprentice through the back door because the person that I worked for was headhunted to another organisation, and he wanted to bring me with him. I got asked in my interview for an apprenticeship about really technical conveyancing pieces. Now, I had worked as a legal executive. I knew them. My friend, who had the mainstream interview, got asked what papers her parents read. So it was a very different interview process. And it is a thing of, you know, we just have to be better to be taken as seriously. We have to know more. We have to have the evidence. We have to be able to see 3 steps forward so that when we get the question, we're really prepared. And I think that is the thing, that to be able to do it on behalf of other people, to be in a space where you get to advocate on behalf of other people, on behalf of organizations who advocate on behalf of other people, is such a privilege. And that should never be taken lightly. I don't take any part of my job lightly at all. It is that thing of supporting others and making sure we're bringing everyone along with us. Because if we start to exclude people, we might solve this, but we create a different them and us over there. And it's about driving everything forward.
You answered my question on what drives and motivates you. I think she's answered that. So, but what I was going to say is, though, why policy? Because I love how you see policy. So tell everybody else why policy is the thing that's going to, that's what works.
I feel you've bigged that up way too much. I suppose because policy impacts absolutely everybody. So my go-to example has always been the slice of bread. Like, you cannot buy a loaf of bread in the shop without being impacted by policy, from, you know, how it's priced, what the VAT rate is, how it's packaged, where the ingredients are. All of that is subject to policy. You can't go off the grid now without being subject to policy, because all the forests are owned and subject to policy. You know, I can't send my child with his pocket money down to the shop without him being impacted by policy, because that bar of chocolate is going to have VAT applied to it. He's a taxpayer. You know, it impacts absolutely everybody, every day, in everything that we do. So we should all get a say in how it's shaped. And that's...
Yeah, I love it. I hadn't thought of it like that beforehand, so it's really interesting. And I love the idea of being prepared, that like if you're going to go up against it, the least you can do is forewarned is forearmed, I think, yeah. And what drives you, Ailbhe? What's the thing that, because you could give up, you've loads under your belt, but you look shocked there. Yeah, clearly you're not going to. What drives you?
Well, I mean, well, first of all, there were lots of things I wanted to say in response to Colette, but because following on from what you're saying, but I will answer your question, or I'll try. What drives me very simply is the sense that the world is not right. It's just not right. I mean, there are people who are, it is the depth of inequality, the spread of inequality. And okay, I started off with gender, but quite quickly, you know, I started to realize it's not just about me being a woman. It's, you know, I'm a middle-class woman, so actually I have a lot more privilege than an awful lot of other women have. So understanding and gradually building in an understanding of class, and then ultimately, you know, again, in terms of my own experience, when I came out as lesbian, understanding that was, you know, that was back in the late 1980s. It's not a wise thing to do. So that, you know, well, it wasn't wise in terms of my family situation, my own family. It was very, very difficult, and thinking sexuality makes a huge difference. And now I would say actually gender identity as well. And then beginning to understand that my whiteness and my living in Europe and my living in Ireland was a massive, 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 massive privilege. And sort of gradually understanding that all of these layers are not at all separate, but that they are actually connected, and that you have to find some way of addressing all of that, of dealing with all of that in I suppose, ever more complicated sort of ways, while not losing sense of where you're going. But I do think that what really drives me all the time is just looking around me and thinking, that's not right, that's not fair, that is deeply demeaning of human beings. You know, I look at what's happening in the Sudan. How can we not look at what's happening in Gaza? I look around the world, you know, and understanding it's not just about what happens here for people like me or people alongside me, that there are global problems, and that's without even beginning to mention climate and environment and so on, and thinking, oh, there's so much. And in many ways, you know, I find it really, really concerning at the moment. I really don't think things are getting all that much better. We have so much work to do. So there's no question. Why would you stop? People say to me, but aren't you retired? And I say, yes, I mean, about like 15 years ago or something. But you don't retire from what you believe in, do you? I mean, if you believe in something, you don't retire. Well, you might if you discover it's wrong, but I don't think I get everything right, but I don't think I'm wrong in feeling that the world is wrong and needs lots of people fighting to put it right.
Yeah, and you actually, so when we talk about...
I get a bit excited about that when I think about it. I'm sorry.
Now is the
I know
time.
it's Breakfast Club.
But you actually wrote a piece in the paper about hope in these times of, you know, you're right, on some levels things look better, but for a lot of people here who are working on the ground, it might not be. So can you talk to us about hope and what it means to you in a time in trying to change?
I do think being able to be hopeful is very important. And sometimes there are circumstances where you can't be hopeful. And I have to say that, you know, thinking about the situation of so many different people in very different situations, I am so full of admiration, thinking, how do they stay hopeful? And I think that when I wrote that little piece, I was asked to write something very short about hope. And I thought, gosh, I'm not sure I can really do that. I mean, why? And then I suddenly thought, no, hope is not a thing. It's not some kind of thing that's out there. Hope is actually what you do. It's an action. You hope that you can help to make the world a better place. You hope that you are doing something. Hope is an action. It's a verb. It's not this noun thing that you go out and one day you have it and the next day you haven't. You've kind of lost it. No. You have to work at it. And you have to work at hope, at being hopeful, at hoping. You have to work at hoping really almost every day, don't you? Because, I mean, if you didn't, you'd be knocked off your chair or your horse or whatever it is you're up on for your own particular purposes. And I think it's really important for us to do that. And when we personally can't do it, I know who I can go and talk to. I know my friends, and I can say I'm feeling, oh my God, I can feel kind of depression descending on top of me at the moment. What will I do? And they say, oh, come on. And you work with other people, and together you start hoping again, so to speak. And I think that's very important, because without hope, there really isn't much hope. There isn't really much point in any of us doing anything at all. We just sit back and just be there and just watch, I don't know, television or do social media and eat popcorn or something, which doesn't seem to me to be a very exciting life, frankly. You know, it's much more exciting to be out there hoping, frankly.
And Colette, have you any, you loved that article?
I do. I also love sitting watching telly and eating popcorn. But yeah, yeah, I did. I loved that article, and it spoke to me, I think, because it is like that. I've had lots of conversations with people around hope, and it's very easy to be cynical and to see hope as wishful thinking, that, you know, it's enough to just say it's going to happen and then, you know, sit back and see. But for me, it's the creation of the vision. The hope comes in what the change is going to look like. That's where hope is. But the work has to be put into actually fulfilling that. So it gives you that aim, and that's why it's really important. Because if we don't have it, then nothing changes, because we don't have the aspiration to make it happen. Whereas, you know, no one is saying, and certainly Ailbhe doesn't seem to be saying either, that it's enough to just want the change and then sit back. It's about having that vision for yourself, having that thing that drives you, and then putting the steps in place. And there's a lot of steps, normally, to making that change. But it's about having the eye on the prize all the time.
Actually, can I just say something about, I think that's absolutely right, Colette, and my own experience is that if you work for a specific change, and, you know, I'm thinking about, I mean, how many referendums have I been involved in? And each time you think, okay, we'll achieve that and all will be well, which of course, absolute rubbish. You know, you change that and something shifts, but that means that something else gets shifted and that knocks on against something else. So I always say now, you know, when you're involved in a process of change and some change happens, that there will then be more work to be done, because that in turn changes the systems and the structures, maybe opens them up a bit, but it will open up also new challenges and new problems and new difficulties, because you'll see more and you'll see further, and your understanding will improve, and you'll see what you didn't see before, which actually the great poet, Galway poet Rita Ann Higgins said, and we saw what we didn't see. And that is so important, that process of change makes you understand that policy is not going to go far enough, that law is rubbish, that whatever is going to need changing, because something is revealed in that process. So staying always hopeful about that every change brings, if they are positive changes, there are changes that are not positive, but if they are positive changes, they will reveal and open up something else which needs doing.
Yeah, and just to keep on that, yeah, so you do experience setbacks. And when we were chatting before, and you were talking about the marriage referendum, and you were like, you lost the first one.
Yes.
So for every win you have, like statistically, you've probably experienced a couple of setbacks. So
excuse me, I have lost more referendums than you've had hot dinners, basically, as far as I can see. That was in 1986, when I was still really a young woman. My daughter was still very young. And in 1983, we had the Eighth Amendment placed in the Constitution, which was a huge, huge blow. I mean, it just felt as if Ireland was locking us in as women. And then in 1986, we had the divorce referendum, and I needed a divorce. I had been married, not to the father of my daughter, actually, but it was very complicated, but I was married to somebody way back in the early 1970s as a young woman for 6 months. And of course, in Ireland, you didn't leave anybody, and UCD actually changed my name back to my family name. And I had to go to them and say, I never changed my name. That's, the name I have at the moment, Smyth. They said, oh, but you've left your husband, haven't you? And I said, yeah, but that doesn't mean you decide to change my name. So all kinds of things happened under the radar as well. So even though technically there was no divorce and so on. So anyway, 1986 came along, we were fighting for divorce. And, I just thought it was about time that Ireland had divorce. It was absolutely ludicrous, ridiculous, it was absurd. And I remember going to my mother, who was a very formidable woman and very absolute in her beliefs, which were Catholic beliefs. And I said, now, Mum, you're going to have to vote yes for this divorce. Well, I can't. She said, I can't do that. I can't do that. And I said, half of your family, 3 of your children required this thing. Well, she said, they'll just have to do without it. And I thought, oh, my God. Anyway, I went ahead and, of course, voted yes, and the rest of Ireland voted no. And I thought, that's it, I'm out of here. I just can't take this. It's a very simple thing. And then I thought, no, actually, this is not the time to go. That would be giving up. And I'm so glad I didn't. I very nearly went, but I didn't, because I thought, no, actually, I think I'll stay and fight that one again. And of course we did in whenever it was, 1995, I think, wasn't it? And we won by 0.3% or something like, but we won. And that was, I think, actually the beginning of a kind of movement in Ireland of opening up and understanding what was there under the lid. And of course, we discovered all of the really horrible, brutal, cruel things that had been done to women, to families, to children. And we're still discovering those things. But that was really a learning, that was a kind of turning point for me. It was really about making a decision and saying, it was a bit about not leaving the sinking ship, because I would have got a job somewhere else. I was an academic, but also I actually, despite the fact that it's been so riddled with problems, I really quite like Ireland, actually. I don't really know why, but I do.
And Colette, what about you? How do you deal with setbacks? How do you view them? How do you see them? How do you put a positive spin on them? Or do you?
No, everything I do is a success. No, obviously, I once thought, when you work in any sort of advisory capacity or advocacy capacity, there will come a point where you make yourself redundant and you're not needed anymore. And I kind of thought, God, wouldn't that be amazing? But that's just not how things work. As Ailbhe said, you'll shift something and then something else needs to shift and then something else needs to shift. And it is about having, I suppose, having that vision is really important, having that thing that is important to you that drives you, so that when you get the setback, that's not over. That's just the setback. What did you learn from it? How did that work out? What could you have done differently? Okay, next time, this is what we do. This is the approach we take. Rather than looking at them necessarily as setbacks, it's a challenge, it's a learning moment, it's something that we need to do slightly differently. And, another bite at it will come along. So it's that thing of, I've probably been called various versions of tenacious, some less favourable than others, but I'll go with tenacious. It's about being that. It's about having that belief that actually I could be part of something that can change. I've done it already, so I know I can do it. So the next step. And sometimes that next step goes in a different direction or somewhere you think it might not go, but it's to keep the momentum going.
And how do you resource that momentum? Because momentum is great when it's going for you, but when you hit a stop, it can be hard to get going again. So how would you resource yourself?
Yeah, to be honest, it's never been an issue to resource it. You know, because my motivation for being in this space is so personal to begin with that I just think that it's really important, and it's always been really important. And other things come along that compete with in your heart for importance, like family and kids and things like that. But it's important, it's even arguably more important because now you've got a responsibility to show what can be done and to bring others along with you and to keep up that piece that is advocacy and inclusion and engagement and that collaborative piece that Al was talking about, that when we move together, what can be done, that it requires that engagement, it requires people to push along together. But it's never been a thing that I have ever felt completely despondent, overwhelmed sometimes, burnt out possibly, but not ever that it wasn't worth doing, no.
I think there's something too about that personal motivation. I mean, just thinking, you know, for a long time, I was fighting back in the 80s and in the 90s, thinking the world has to be a better place for my daughter. Things have to improve for women. And now I have grandchildren, and I think, you know, there's something very personal that it's not just about people that you don't know. It is also about your own family, your own friends, your own community, your own whatever, that really does help to keep you going as much as, and I'm very lucky being part of kind of the feminist community and the LGBT community and the socialist community and so on, and all of that being part of collective work is really important, certainly to me, as well as my own family.
So finding spaces like
yes,
people.
Yes,
people.
yes. I mean, certainly, I look back and I think, gosh, I could have spent maybe more time with my daughter, although she says, no, that was enough, Mum. That was quite enough. I have been heard to say this, and I kind of know what she means as an only child. But, you know, I look at my grandchildren and I think there's something very moving about thinking about the world that they're going to be growing up in and how my generation is not leaving that world in a good place, in a good state, so that you feel huge responsibility and also trying to sort of help them to see how important change is without doing a kind of missionary thing on them, you know.
Yeah, we're coming up on time. I know it flew, but I do always like to ask people that if there is someone in the audience who is hearing you in a very personal way, so somebody who is either working to make a change or who is in a situation in their own life where they, like you said, they just know it's wrong, but they have no idea where to start, what would be your advice to them?
Well, first of all, hold on to that feeling, because it's your 99.99 recurring % certain to be right. And cast around, look around, talk to people, see, is there a group, is there an organization, is there a place, is there a space where people are already thinking like you are? And if there is, gravitate towards that, see what's happening, make contact. Sometimes there isn't, and you really start off on your own. And I think that's quite difficult, but talk to your family and to your friends about it. And I still believe it's really useful to write to the papers. There's something really good about it. It's a real action. It's much more than going on X and sending off some kind of stupid tweet or something. You know, it's horrible. But get out there into the world. I'm very anti-X at the moment because it's just so toxic. And I don't know about everybody else, but I mean, my feet are burnt off me with it. You know, it's just awful. But there's something about standing up and writing to your local paper or national newspapers and saying, this is wrong. And if they don't publish that letter, you know, be reassured they don't publish anybody's letters as far as I can see, but except a few. But it's well worth doing. It also helps you to sort out where you're at. So even just on your own, you start off, and it will lead to something, and you get the bit between your teeth. But trying to find out first if there is, where are the like-minded people? And if they're not immediately obvious, you'll find 2 or 3 and start them off yourself.
I love it. And Colette?
Sorry. Yeah, I suppose my answer to that would be kind of three things. Like the first would be absolutely, stick with it, because your voice is really important, and there aren't enough diverse voices in policy making and law making. I argued the toss for 8 whole months to get a piece of legislation changed, because it didn't reflect the debt positions of low-income households. It wasn't written with low-income people in mind, and it was insolvency legislation for people with no money. And it took a referral to the Attorney General to get that law changed, and it changed, but it was an uphill, horrendous battle to show how the legislation had been written without the people who really needed it in mind. So that voice is really important. I think secondly, and I'm gonna bore people to death saying this one, but to know your data, to have, anecdote isn't enough to change policy, to change things. You need to actually know where it's grounded. So, in the health space, for example, my dad, we applied for home care in October 2011. He died in February 2012, and in November 2019, I got a phone call asking if he still needed it, because he was getting close to the top of the queue. We're from Finglas. My father-in-law, who's from leafy Dublin South, I married well, he needed home care on the 15th of December, and there was a carer at his door on the 30th of January. So I immediately felt that, but that's an anecdote. So that doesn't necessarily mean that, there was an intervening period, things might have changed. So I went looking, and I spoke to people who had done research in this space, and they said, yeah, there is research available that says in Tallaght, they use their allocation by March. In Clontarf, they're desperately trying to get rid of it in December so they can keep their budget. I read the OECD reports that said the poorest 20% in Ireland is twice as likely to have an unmet healthcare need than the richest 20%. So I have my anecdote, I have my data, I have my international research. Now I have an advocacy position. So it's making sure that you're building that you can actually show your evidence and show your support. And then it's, unfortunately, back to the poverty premium, put the work in, because it's a lot of work and it needs to get done. So.
I love it. I'm always flummoxed by the amount of people who aren't able to answer a question. So I always say to people, just send an email and ask them why. Because people say, well, they said I can't have this, and I'll say why, and they'll say, well, I don't know, the email said I can't have it. And I'm like, well, just ask them why, and a lot of the time people don't have answers. Coming close to time, what was the best piece of leadership advice you ever got, or that you would like to pass on? Did you think of one?
No one's ever given me leadership advice. I don't know if that's a reflection on me or on them. But yeah, I suppose for me, it is, and Claire will laugh at this, I have a fascination with Charles Darwin. And, in his 90s, he was playing various musical instruments to earthworms just to see what it would do and see if they would have an impact. And I think that's the thing, that's the goal. Always be curious. We won't have the answers to everything, but that's not a reason to stop looking for them, to keep that fire lit, to keep that quest for knowledge and for change, and to keep that going.
Thank you. That's a good one. And Ailbhe?
I think a bit like Colette, I don't remember getting leadership advice, except people telling me to stop and keep quiet.
Don't take that one.
Exactly. And I think in a way, when people try to stop you, you know you're on the right path, actually, and keep going. So I think in a way, keep going, and also trust your gut. I think that's really, really, really important when you're working on something and you have this sense that this is right. Don't let other people put you off. That is the advice I would always give to people. Listen, learn, read, think, talk. It's not about not learning, but it's about understanding that people will resist change if they can, and they will try and stop you. Don't allow yourself to be stopped. Don't allow yourself to be put off that path that you feel is really right. But as you go, strengthen your rationale for it, strengthen your arguments, strengthen your understanding of why this is right. And the best way to do that is always collectively. I don't hold much of a candle for leadership which isn't contesting and challenging hierarchy, which understands that the best kinds of leaders are the ones who work with and alongside rather than just top down. So that's...
Thank you so much. So we're at time. Wasn't that phenomenal? Like, oh my God, round of applause. Did it. So for those of you who are new, there's two actual parts to the Breakfast Club. So first of all, we give you something to think about. And second of all, this is a time for you guys to connect with other people in the sector and to talk about what you've heard. So it's 10 to 11 now, and we'll go till about 20 past. Is there coffee left? There's coffee and buns still left. And what we'd ask you to do is meet with people. There's a load of us floating around. If you don't know anybody, just say hi and we'll get you together. Have a chat about what you heard. And then we're going to come back at 20 past and we'll take questions from the audience, if that's okay. So thank you so much, Colette, Ailbhe. Fascinating. I love it. Thank you so much. A little extra boot of us.